Hi, I'm Vinita.
Hi, I'm Shumon. So today we have with us Ipsa. Ipsa is a science communicator who brought her background as a biologist to the world of visual communication and scientific storytelling. After earning her PhD at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, Ipsa did a postdoc where she transitioned to science communication by creating a book on the science of color and color changing animals.
Ipsa currently does freelance science, communication, and illustration under her own brand, Ipsawonders. She represents women in STEM and is motivating many of us through these interactions and workshops. We are happy to have you here with us, Ipsa. Can you please tell us about your work?
Thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here. A brief thing about my work. Well, I am essentially a science visualizer, and the idea for me about the work that I'm trying to do is to spread science by using joy and beauty as a medium. And the hope that I have with the visuals that I create is to inspire curiosity and inspire trust in science. I work with scientists and I also make my own independent work. And the idea is to work for different kinds of audiences, which include the scientific community itself, the students who are in training or just studying in school and may one day want to participate in science in one or the other capacity, and also to other publics beyond the scientific sort of milieu as well. The dream is to have science be part of public spaces. So I'm just going to give a very brief idea about the journey I have taken and about the work I have done, and I do with a flavor of sort of if somebody wanted to pursue it, how could they go about it. So my own current personal practice is about how drawing can be used as a way to ask questions in science. And I'll just talk a little bit about how I sort of arrived at this journey. Uh, so I started, of course, like a run of the mill scientist. I pursued a PhD and was a liquid transfer specialist. And then towards the end of my PhD, I was very convinced that a life in lab with the kind of methods that I have been working on is not what I imagine doing for the rest of my life. And so after a period of introspection, I realized that I liked the idea of sharing science. Back in the day, I didn't have trust in my writing abilities, but I did like drawing. So I sort of started drawing again, like drawing for me properly last happened in school. But then I suppose as a biologist, you kind of never really leave drawing because you do a lot of specimen drawings in your graduate and your postgraduate studies. So it kind of stays with you. Like biology as a study is very visual in nature. And so that was kind of the right space as well. And the biggest transforming experience for me during that time was actually dance performance that I was a part of with some of my friends and dancers. We did this huge dance piece on ecology of fig at a student conference in Bangalore. So, we embodied a storm, a fig tree, a monkey. And it was just such a beautiful experience to share, a story of a fig tree, the ecology of a fig tree through ourselves. And that's when it sort of hit me that how art can be a great way to storytell science. The response of the audience to that piece is very emotional, like, so we were able to connect in a very rich way. And since then, at least with the work that I do independently, I try to think about that factor about how do I connect with my audience. During this time, I then also got this amazing postdoctoral opportunity where I now worked with Dr. Minat Sirajuddin at InStem. And the cool thing about my postdoc was that while everyone in the lab was doing science, using reagents and pipettes and whatever. I was doing science pencil. So I did work on two things there. I created, or I'm rather still creating, that book on color change in animals. So that was more about science communication. And at the same time, we also worked on a project where I was trying to summarize the science of one of these molecules that we worked on in the lab using drawing. And what happened during that process of research and drawing is that we uncovered some new questions that hadn't been asked before, because while drawing, we figured out that data from some studies actually doesn't happen, sort of to match up when you put the idea of structure and movement together. So that was like a really cool revelation for me at that time. Like, you read about these things and David Goodsell's work or somebody else's work, but then to see it yourself in your own practice was like really cool. And at that time, I also started talking to students who are training to be scientists about idea of science illustration, and started giving a lot of workshops. And that's kind of something that I still continue to do, because I do believe that science illustration and science visualization has a lot of potential to participate in science communication and scientific research efforts. So yeah, and because I of my experience, I have this agency, so I do exploit it all the time to talk about it. So, and I'm just going to give you a brief sort of glimpse into my portfolio, just really sorry, let me go back, just really to show off and give you a sense of the kind of work that is possible to do with science and art together. If you are interested, you can look me up on the web at ipsawonders.com, or on my social media presence, where also I exist as Ipsawonders. Now, I guess I've taken a lot of time, so I'll just quickly go through some of the ideas. So, like I already mentioned, that my own work, I've worked on science communication and scientific inquiry itself, but I do feel that visuals in science have potential elsewhere as well, which includes entertainment, it includes education and peer communication. So I actually think of scientist to scientist communication more as peer communication, science communication. Of course, what we're talking about there is science as well. Talk a little bit about zines. So zines is like my current favorite medium to talk about science. I have made a lot of zines, and I still make a lot of zines independently as well as in collaboration with folks at CCMB mainly, and some other scientists. So zine is basically a short form magazine. If you delete the maga from a magazine, you get zine. And though it has its own history of how zine started, I have sort of co-opted them for science communication. So this is an 8-page or 12-page visually rich media where you have image and text relationships to bring together a narrative, and the kind of stories you can tell is, of course, there's no limit. And the interesting thing is that because it's a very visual medium, it connects with a larger audience. And in my own experience, what I've found is that while there are words which tell you literally what the story is, I've seen people, ask really interesting questions after going through this, because they are trying to bring more symbolism, more metaphors into play than you, as a maker, really intended. And those discussions are interesting because they are kind of a new way to think about that subject matter, a new way to think about science. And for the people in the audience, it's a new way to ask questions. And I think as long as you make people curious and you force them to ask questions and you make them think, I think then you've done your job as a science communicator. So yeah, that's really about my work, and you can get in touch, and I have a reasonable social media presence, so happy to communicate. Thank you.
I think there
Let's stop
will be
sharing.
a lot of people who will get in touch with you after this because it is super cool. We really wanted to know, was there any particular incident during growing up that you recall which made you fall in love with science?
Oh, yeah, like there is a very specific one. Like I was always like one of those curious students who, all scored well. I think a lot of people in science are kind of from that back bracket. I remember when I was in fifth standard, I used to bug my science teacher so much that she used to be like, "Okay, Socrates died, and that's when you came." And uh, I'm sure she was just like, sort of dissing me
Yeah.
for interrupting her in the class all the time. I remember this particular time in grade 8. I grew up in this city called Karnal, and there we have this one, um, National Dairy Research Institute. So for science, they took us to NDRI, and there for the first time, the scientists, which I'm guessing at that time were the PhD students, they showed us this DNA gel electrophoresis, and for me to look at that orange glow, I was like, oh my god, scientists are so cool. Like in eighth grade at my time, we had not even read about DNA or central dogma properly. Those
Right,
were
right.
like words we had heard, but they were not part of our textbook, and we were
Yeah,
still like going to study them in the next few grades.
yeah.
And then I was like, okay, I don't really understand this, but I'm getting access to look at something that I understand is precious and rare. And like I realized that scientists are these cool people who get access to, privilege to access all of these things. So that's what, I want in my life. And I want to like discover things. I want to find out things. And I think I pretty much made that decision to be a scientist with that very day. And then I worked my way towards it. Like I was not one of those people who ever thought about medical school or anything of that nature. I just like very clearly knew that I'm going to be a scientist. So
That's
So
amazing.
I
That's
think
incredible.
it was wonders of open day.
So, were you into art as a child, and how did the idea of sci art came to you? What was the inspiration behind it?
yeah, I mean, I was actually pretty decent at drawing in school. Like, I wasn't like the best fine artist student we had in school, but I was interested, and like as a fifth subject, I actually had fine arts, and I had excellent fine arts teacher as well. Like there was actually even a point in time in school, though I was very convinced that I wanted to be a scientist. There was like this one point of sort of dilly-dallying that maybe I should also pursue fine arts, but that never really happened because the urge to be scientist was really strong. And it all came back to me at the end of the PhD when I was trying to figure out what is it that I would like to do. So at that point of time, like my PhD was honestly actually a little bit stressful sort of experience. And then like I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and do things that make me happy, and like drawing was one of them. And so I started drawing, and it just happened that I started drawing more like natural history kind of stuff. The institute was a really green space, and we had this amazing nursery, and they had like some really interesting flowers and stuff. So I used to just go to the nursery and talk to the people there, and like ask them to give me a stem or two from some cool stuff that they were growing, and they would give me, and I would just like look at those things and draw. And so that's how that practice sort of started. But of course now after a point I realized that like my strengths are understanding cell and molecular biology, and I'm able to actually visualize them in interesting ways. So with time I sort of shifted the focus from natural history stuff to the stuff that I was like really good at in terms of understanding the content itself. And then with time I think I also became good at drawing that stuff and talking about it.
That's
So yeah, that's how
that's
it
really
started.
beautiful.
So we all have different kinds of career journeys. From some, their trajectories follow as they plan it, and for some, it's absolutely opposite. Like everything is new. So the path you have chose is one of the less traveled. So, what has been your biggest realization through your uni journey?
The biggest realization, I suppose, doing something that not a lot of people have done or are doing is a great place to be in, because it's kind of like a privilege to make way for more people to come. It's a little bit, of course, hard work, and it's a bit of a struggle, because you're like, it's like you just jumped into the deep end of the pool and you're just trying to figure out how to stay afloat. But once you figure out those ways, then you can invite the rest of the community to follow. The feeling, that's been great, and I think that's also the reason that I do give a lot of talks and I do give a lot of workshops, so that I can share my experiences and share what I've learned along the way, in a way that's hopefully useful for the people who aspire to pursue similar journeys.
So it's like being a flag bearer to to the theme. And so were you ever scared? Like, this is just a general question. Like, were you ever scared in between? Like, after you probably started your postdoc and some years, because I have realized it that freelancers have to go through a lot.
So I wouldn't say I was scared, but I do struggle with different kinds of insecurities from time to time. I mean, in some sense, I have some privilege that I'm supported by my family. So I know that even if I am not able to sort of, let's say, earn this month, it's not like I'm struggling to make a life. Like, I know that I will still be fed, housed, and clothed, and that's not an issue. But insecurities are there all the time, that whether is this sustainable in the long run, how long will the hustle last, um, when will people start realizing that I'm not a hobbyist and I'm a professional. Those kind of concerns come from time to time, and there are bad days. But then the moment I talk to aspiring students or people who are in similar boat, it sort of feels good that, yeah, slowly but steadily we are making a change in this space, and things will happen, and things will work out, so that sort of reassurance comes back. So I wouldn't use the word scare, but yeah, I have dealt with insecurities and I do deal with them time to time.
What do you think are the biggest myths that exist in the scientific community?
One of the biggest revelations is that now that I am sort of slightly away from that idea of being in the lab, and I've also been a young student who didn't have exposure to lab at certain point of time in my life, right? Like when I was a grade 8 student. I think the biggest difference is the understanding of how science works as a process itself. Understand a lot more about it right now than I did before I entered a lab. And even when I was in the lab, I was kind of in the process, and I didn't have that perspective of reflection, of introspection of how science works as a process, why the scientific method works, what are the flaws in scientific method, and all of that. So I think those are the kind of things I understand now more than I did when I was in the lab. And I think in that, the topmost thing is how we speak about science or think about science. Somehow, if we think of science as like a fact finding process, and when we pursue science, that's the conviction we go with, like that what we are studying and what we are trying to understand, this is what happens. And now that I understand the scientific process better, I understand that all our facts are conditional. It's conditional to your method, it's conditional to your biases, it's conditional to the model organism or your cell line or whatever. And before it sort of reaches the status of a fact or something closer to a fact, it has to go to a lot more rigorous processes. And as a grad student, I mean, as a PhD student, I certainly did not have that realization. I really do feel that when we talk about like during that time, I think there should be more discussion on the scientific process itself. That's kind of absent, I feel. And like we do talk about our science, we do talk about like the specifics, of whatever, like blasts signaling process or blood disease that we're working on. Just the method of science, I think that's not a discussion that's had enough. Like, where do hypotheses come from? Why do we choose a certain topic over others? Why do we use the methods that we have? What if we were to ask this question in a different way? Like those kind of discussions, I feel maybe in certain spaces, maybe certain institutes or certain individual PIs encourage that, but I didn't see a lot of that around me, not in my lab and in even labs around me. And I do feel like that kind of perspective would have been really useful in just trying to think about science as a larger body of no, not just body, science as a process of knowledge making.
This is a very pertinent point that you mentioned.
So I personally feel that maybe the pressure of not feeling is there. And a lot of places, failures are actually celebrated. So dealing with failures is always a very difficult task, especially if it is something which is relatively new in the field, like, and you are directly in charge of bringing it out to the world. So how did you deal with your failure?
I think during the PhD era and post the PhD era, my sort of approach to failures has been different. And I think it was also directly because of a change in environment and the kind of people I was surrounded by. During PhD, failures were really hard to deal with, and I actually struggled with mental health issues and stuff like that. So that was a very different experience. And then after I moved out of that surf environment and um, came to doing the work that I am still doing, they kind of uh, handling failures was relatively easier because I guess I think I figured out that I'm braver than I imagined. And also because like all those failures were kind of learning opportunities. I learned from them. I understood and I could reflect. I had that mental space to reflect on how and where things went wrong and what could have been different. And, with respect to like the kind of work I do now, I really don't think that anything is a failure. Like I think of things like as more like this doesn't work now, but like it's still like a work in progress. Like someday after some tweaks it will work. So I like the only thing that has failed in that sense is that delivery it in a certain like on that time scale, on that deadline. But I don't think work itself is like a failure. It just hasn't reached where it has to, and it'll just take more time, more reflection, more work to get there. So
Yeah.
I think I kind of think about it that way. The things that I've failed at, and I don't beat myself too much about it, is like there's certain interviews that I make through, there's certain job opportunities that I make through or whatever. But I think that's just okay. Like I don't think of them as failures. It, uh, but more like, yeah, that didn't pan out. It's okay. Like I'm fine with where things are.
I think realizing the fact that it's okay to, like, everything won't fall in place and that's fine is I think very important to like get over failures.
So like yeah, I like nothing mentioned it. Like I even reflecting on my time in PhD. I think the biggest problem was that I associated my identity and my happiness with the success of that damn PCR or with that success of getting that cloning to work or getting that that question to go well. And somehow I forgot that I am also somebody beyond the lab, and whatever happened in the lab was just became such a strong force that it engulfed and enveloped the identity of self. And that's something that I've realized later on to be careful about. Whatever I am doing, like I do remind myself that I am beyond XYZ scenario.
So, from the inception of your idea of sci art and to actually taking it as your career and as a freelancer and making it a success, I would say. what were the major challenges you faced in your journey?
So one of the biggest challenges, I think, has been my ability to convince people that this is something you should pay me for, and that like pay me fairly for. In terms of sort of admiration and encouragement, there's a lot of it. Like a lot of people are like, "Hey, wow, you're doing cool things," and this is really inspiring and all of that. But then, like, this also has to translate into me making a living, and that's the gap that's been kind of hard to navigate. And scientists, and like, I mean, it's not the problem with scientists, but like the scientific bodies, they don't know how to interact with freelancers, how to deal with them, how to pay them, how to collaborate with them. So we still, struggle with the idea of quotations and timely payments and the feedback cycle. And the other thing is that because I mean, for me as a freelancer, it's a short-term project, and sometimes scientists, because of the way they think about their papers and their studies, which go on for an indefinite period of time, timelines are very fluid for other projects as well. And it kind of is weird because sometimes they will respond after 20 days or after 3 months, and by that time you're busy doing something else, and that just doesn't work for you. So that kind of professional interaction where you get timely conversations and timely feedback has also been kind of a challenge.
So we have always done art before studying science, actually, because like we do art in our like when we are in nursery or LKG, like we do art before, much before we do science. So what is your childhood? What was your childhood hobby, and or what is something you practiced and developed over? Was art something that you practiced and developed over time? Your science inspired your art, or your art inspired your science?
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure I can really answer that question because I don't think I have reflected on my childhood practices that way. Um, but the one thing that I mean, of course, I was a reasonably good art student in school, but going back to an earlier time when I was much younger, I think for almost my whole school duration and starting since very young, I took a lot of walk and then just looked at things. And I don't think I was necessarily asking questions at that point of time, but I was just trying to process the world around me. And I remember, things like just noticing forms and shapes and colors. And that was kind of like passive learning. And I remember there was this one point in time where I was in a place which had some really interesting leaf shape. I think I was in third standard or fourth standard at that point of time. And I remember how these can become objects you play with, or you work with, or kind of make sculptures with. Like, I didn't do those things, but I just thought about them. So I think just looking at things has been a practice of sorts during those walks that have influenced the kind of questions I ask, I suppose, in terms of whether it's the science or whether it's the art. Just like that idea of form and structure inform a lot of my work and a lot of my thought processes.
So
So, art is a
just
way of expressing your thoughts, and not everyone who conceives the beauty of cultured dish can be thinking of making it in an art form. So, how do you conduct your Sci Art workshop, especially for training people who are new to art?
Well, I guess the simplest answer is that you should come and attend one.
Absolutely.
But I think how I approach it is again like just asking a lot of questions. What I do is I bring a lot of material, and I try to sort of create a space where I make people think about it differently and ask questions about it. So, like one of the activities that I do a lot is I will put a piece, a couple of paintings from like really old natural history illustrations there, and just we look at them and then we try to understand what was it that the maker was trying to convey to us. And through that process, we kind of learn that how an image like this is thought about for, and what are the kind of tiny decisions one makes, what are the kind of choices one makes, how is this real, or is this an interpretation of reality? Like, so we ask all of those questions, and then that sort of becomes the segue into thinking about your own science in a different way, I hope. And so yeah, with time I've sort of built certain set of activities and certain set of inquiries that hopefully make people think about science differently and science art differently.
So reminding people again that sci art is not like it's always not a hobby and it's a profession. What do you love to do the most when you're taking break from sci art?
Yeah, you can put me on a beach any day. I'm really happy around water.
That's nice. Can you comment on the science communication that is presently there in what would be your message to the upcoming generation, and where should they start if they want to pursue science communication and the scope of sci art?
I think the biggest thing, that biggest advice I could give people all the time is spend some time understanding your audience. Like, whom do you want to tell these stories to and why? Because I see that in workshops and all, when I work with students, like as PhD students, we were very attached to our science. We were very attached to those finer nuances that we have uncovered. And somehow when we try to talk about them, we talk about them, those things, in a way that we would talk about with our lab mate or our floor mate, or somebody who speaks that language and somebody who understands that level of detail. And what that doesn't do is connect with the audience. And so my advice is usually to just figure out who your audience is first, and why do you want to tell the stories you want to tell. And then once you are looking at all of these questions together, you will figure out what is it that your audience needs. So you shouldn't come from a holier than thou, I'm a scientist who knows everything and let me share what I know with you. I think it should come from a space from, I think I understand you, and I think what your interests might be, and I think this is something you would find cool. This is something that might help you. Let people ask questions which don't necessarily make sense. Just have open conversations with your audience, encourage them to think about science differently.
Art has been an integral part of every change in our society, as it has a unique appeal to our sense of aesthetics, and like it can reach everywhere and to everyone. In this regard, how can science in the form of art help us reach bigger audience, like convey the message to laymen?
Right. Rather than giving information, I think we should come from a space where we try to involve them in thinking about science. And like, my vision is that art that tells stories of science should be part of public places, like flyovers and tall buildings can have murals that talk about stories of science, stories of scientists, and such that they are part of our everyday experience. And every day on commute, you're looking at some science happening on that wall or on that flyover, and
Right.
it's making you think, and maybe it's inspiring you to become part of that movement.
So, do you expect science to be as popular as cinema today?
That may or may not happen, but I do feel like science can be like a playground. Like, cinema is up there. I mean, it's also like a capitalistic business, so like very different kinds of mechanisms operate to make cinema a success. It's not just about an art medium, but I do feel that science can in a way be a part of the play process, like how we engage with things, and how we create, like that maker make and break and figure things out, like that attitude. That kind of sensibility can certainly be embodied in different ways, and I think that's also science. I mean, science shouldn't necessarily be the idea where one is in the lab and doing experiments in that certain way. Like, that idea of exploring should also be rebranded as science, I would say. And then that play becomes far more inviting and becomes a conduit to thinking about science, even if you're not in the lab. Like, I don't think we need to make everyone a scientist. I just think that we need to build trust in science as a knowledge making process. And so we need to expand our definition of where science can happen and who can do science and who can talk about science.
So every success story comes from a lot of hard work and planning. Like, is there anything that keeps you motivated, like to create the art that you create?
I mean, I don't really have a routine, very defined routine. I mean, at this point of time, I actually do have a day job, and the Ipsawonders stuff is kind of like a night job for me. So in that sense, there's some sort of routine. But other than that, I think the inspiration for me really comes from reading and looking at other people's work. So, or sometimes, of course, it's paid work. So it comes from the discussion with the scientists or communicator in question. But I wouldn't say there is a defined routine. I mean, paid work is happening because it's paid work, but my own work, yeah, I develop it very slowly and maturely. I don't have it restricted in deadlines. I let things brew in my head before I put things down on paper, and that's kind of how things go. I'm trying to at least draw or read every day. So, yeah.
So we would like to know about your new book that recently got published.
Right. So this book came, I mean, this is my first sort of commission book, and I'm really happy that it's out there. The book actually got released a couple of years back on the open source platform called Storyweaver. So Pratham Books is publisher. They create books for the young children with different reading levels in the Indian context. And I worked on this book with them, I think 2-3 years ago. And it's just that because of pandemic, publishing the hard copy got delayed, and it came out. The hard copy came out this year. This book has been a great experience, a great learning experience, because this is the first time I really worked for a very young audience. I mean, most of my work has been either for high school students or very much educated urban adults. This time I had to think about students who are not really even, don't have access to science very much in a big way, don't have access to microscopes, and probably don't have access to these kind of images as well. So it's not something they're necessarily familiar with. So to introducing students to something, and these students to something entirely new, and creating images in a way that would help build an understanding of what these creatures look like, these creatures in, a drop of pond water. So that was interesting, because I had to be sort of a little bit whimsical to keep it sort of fun, but also quite literal, so as to stay close to what the thing actually looks like. So that was kind of an interesting balance to navigate.
And we would end this conversation with our last question, that what do you think about Kitchen Lab?
I think it really is true to that idea where we're trying to increase access of who can do science and who can indulge in asking questions. And so like Bangalore is one of those places where science galleries coming up, and we also have the Vishweshwarya Museum, and both of these places, they do have. So I like that idea that people who are not necessarily PhDs and people who just want to try something or have an idea get to explore this further in a space that's been created. I think that idea is empowering and should be encouraged in every place. So I'm really glad that Kitchen Lab is trying to do that. And it also sort of comes to this idea of frugal science. For me, like that, you can find ways to do things which doesn't necessarily rely on, expensive gadgets and expensive material, and like jugaad is possible in several ways that because science is not so much about being in a specific space where you have all this equipment, but science is about asking questions, and that can be enabled in multiple ways. So I think that's the idea that I like, about what I understand of Kitchen Lab. And kudos to you for making that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.